far away from my friend and relation, betrayed by the black velvet band.
Hello and welcome to the Shropshire Witches podcast. I'm Amy.
And I'm Alix.
And today we are delving into something that I am so excited for, and that is the history of piracy. Now, I think when we say the word piracy, it brings very evocative images to mind. For some of us, it might be that, that early 2000s advert where it's like, you wouldn't download a DVD or that kind of thing, but that's not the sort of piracy we're going to talk about today. We're going to be delving into the motives, the history, how pirates almost become I suppose, quasi-folkloric in themselves, and also some really notable interest in pirates. And I don't know about you, Alix, but there's something that's so exciting about pirates, and there's something, I suppose, quite appealing to running away to sea. So you remember that meme a few years ago? Look at me, I'm very current. That was like, oh, what's your Roman Empire? And it was all the idea that men think about the Roman Empire loads. I think piracy and the Golden Age of Sail is my Roman Empire. Yeah. Other than Shropshire folklore, obviously, because I've got a bit of an obsession. I honestly must think about running away to sea at least once a week. I have a bad lesson at school, year 8 are annoying me, or I have to do something extra after school, and I think, you know what, if I was to run away to sea, I wouldn't have to do this. So it really is something that I'm fascinated with, and I think it's going to be really exciting to delve a little bit deeper.
I love that. I think for me, if I was to look at the equivalent, pirate-wise, it's got to be, and look, I say this with a heavy heart, folks, because it's closed down, this ride, but it's the pirate ride at Drayton Manor, which was amazing. Yeah, going on that little boat, and you went through with all those little weird with sort of waxwork things in the water that probably would give you cholera if you touched it. I loved it. I was obsessed. And my sisters always wanted to go on the sort of the fast high rides. I sound so odd. The fast high rides, those ones that give you what they call an adrenaline rush. But I would go on the pirate ride time and time again in the same days. So yeah, it's not a massive surprise I'm probably doing this podcast, but yes, certainly when I was little, I used to drag mum and dad on there, and in the end, dad just used to come with me because mum was like, I can't do it anymore, I can't keep going on that ride. But it was wonderful.
No more pirates.
No more pirates today. But I feel like if you're going to talk about running away to sea, which I love, I think my equivalent would be somewhere between sitting in a shed with Jack Hargreaves while he talks about folklore at old houses, because that would be heaven. Program pitch fikes. Yeah, program pitch fikes. Sorry, we're mid-lambing, so my head has gone. Program pitch folks is get on YouTube and look up Jack Hargreaves the old ways, because you can thank me later. But it would be that, or somewhere between. You're just a bit younger, but you'll remember this. Do you remember when Neve? I can't remember her name. Oh, she one of the Cusacks. There's Irish acting sisters. I think she was on Heartbeat as well. She played Nick Berry's wife. But do you remember when she played Beatrix Potter in the 90s, the start, and she puts...
Yes, vaguely, yeah.
There's a rabbit on the table and everything. She goes, oh, get out the way, Jemima, and all this stuff, and walks across this beautiful music and goes really quite a sort of preternatural distance to post a letter, and she's walking in clogs and things. That's where I go. If things get rough, I'm like, that's where I go. That film's set in the Lake District. I'd be like, that's a bit of me.
Love that.
And honestly, when this is finished, I'm going to send you the YouTube link, because I think that is going to be, if ever the soul was soothed, it's that. It is that bit. And the bit at the end of, the Sea Guard when Mrs. Medlock hugs Martha, or that Martha hugs her. I can't remember that, when they all watch Colin Craven running up the gardens.
Yes, yeah.
That's another one as well.
I love that. That's really delightful. I'm just like, I want to go and get scurvy on a boat full of slightly hairy men. That probably says a lot about me, really, doesn't it?
Because we've established this, because you wear like the cool makeup and everything, and you always look like a Victorian medium. And we've always said I'm the token basic one. I'm the one who drives like the Fiat 500.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
Going for a walk with my cats, listening to the Country File soundtrack or something.
Love that.
There's one tune from it, but the soundtrack, it's pretty short, guys. It's one track.
New album just dropped.
Exactly, tell the kids. So yeah, I'm very excited. One thing I do want to do, and we said we'd do this before, it said Recording in progress. Dear listeners, I lost my very dearest friend. I'm going to say my little dog, because I realised that when I'm going to talk about him now, someone might think, oh my God. But my little dog, Serge, who Amy has met, and he was an absolute legend. He was a ripe old age of 17 or 18. We weren't sure because I'd had him for 16 years, and he was in or around a year or two when I got him. And he was an absolute gent. I mean, that is a slight lie. He was grumpy. He never had a good word for anyone. And he was a cantankerous old devil, but he was a little Jack, and I loved him very much. And he passed away last Saturday. And it is a huge loss and void. And I'd like to dedicate this episode to him because I think he would absolutely have made a perfect pirate. God knows he was cantankerous enough, and he was without scruple or moral. So I think he was perfect. But I would love to dedicate this episode to him because I miss him endlessly and always shall. And I think he is the dearest friend I've ever had. And he's been with me through thick and thin, through boyfriends, different places I've lived, all sorts. And it's a wonder, really, with all that he made it to 18. But he was an absolute legend. So I'll say here's to Serge in this episode.
Here's to Serge, and I agree. I think he'd have been the perfect pirate. So this episode is definitely dedicated to him.
Oh, Sergie. There we go. Right, let's move on before I weep.
Yes, same, because I'm a crier. So I want to begin by, so there's two ways we could have done this. We could have focused entirely on what is known as the Golden Age of Piracy, which really starts in the 1600s.
Yeah.
But I thought that was doing the idea of piracy a disservice, because it is such a vast subject. And even tonight in this episode, we will be kind of glossing over aspects or not having the chance to really go to the depth that we would like. But piracy is actually a very old concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's at least 3,000 years old. It's had different names. There's been different variations of it, but certainly there was piracy in the classical world. We have references to it in things like the Iliad and the Odyssey. We have that famous story that I'm going to massively paraphrase now, where Julius Caesar was said to have been captured by pirates. And when he was due to be ransomed, they gave a figure, and he was outraged by the amount that they asked for and demanded that they demand more for him. Typical Caesar.
Right.
So piracy has a long history. And certainly, I think whenever there has been a boost in socioeconomic factors such as wars, famines, purely economic reasons, there has been people that have took to the seas in order to try and find a better life or a better way of making money or that kind of thing. And we see that with the Golden Age of Piracy. A lot of the Golden Age of Piracy is actually started really because of economic and societal factors, and also some of the religious upheaval of the 1600s. And we also see that in the classical world. I want to focus just briefly before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all on medieval piracy.
Yeah, please.
Because in my opinion, I think, and obviously I'm the expert, I think that medieval piracy is the first time we can really look at the phenomena and see similarities to what we now think of the archetypal pirate.
Mm-hmm.
So there's various different periods within the medieval period where piracy happens. I think probably the most archetypal are the Vikings. Now, I could info dump till kingdom come about the Vikings. I absolutely love them. Viking history is amazing, but certainly the Vikings were, in many ways, pirates. Now, the term Viking, there's lots of different ideas about what it could mean or the idea of it, but usually it was a marker of something someone did. So rather than being a Viking because of your ethnic or kind of nationality or your place of origin, you were a Viking because you had took to the seas to commit piracy.
Okay.
So it was in many ways, I've seen it referred to in a lot of books called a Viking. So you go a Viking. And these people were from most often places like Scandinavia, but also You certainly had people from the Mediterranean and elsewhere that joined Viking bands that would go and raid usually monasteries and other buildings that were seen as fairly easy to raid and get the treasures that were in there with minimal effort. So monks were less likely to fight back than if you'd go and raid a castle or anything like that. And usually monasteries and areas like that had a lot of wealth, gold, jewels, that kind of thing that could easily be transferred to other hands, sold on, melted down, that kind of thing. So I think the Vikings are definitely a form of piracy. We never see them being referred to as pirates because that language wasn't in use during the 8th, 9th, and up to the 11th centuries. Okay. They were called Danes, Vikings, even things like sea thieves. But
sea thieves, that's quite hard to say, actually. Yeah,
sea thieves, it is. But certainly I think they are where I'd like to start. I think they're a good starting point because they are quite unscrupulous with their morals quite often. There's that kind of very Hollywood 1950s idea of Vikings going a raping and a pillaging, and even though there was a lot more to the society than that, undoubtedly things like that still happened. And that is something that we will see as we move through the history of piracy, is that yes, they're fascinating, they're interesting, but there's always a victim, and there's always somebody that suffers as a result of these actions. So after the Vikings, there's somebody in particular that I want to talk about, because I think not only is he bloody brilliant, but he is a really good example of medieval piracy and how the medieval pirate links to kind of the wider outlaws in the medieval period. So people who were outlawed for various reasons, and even like folkloric figures like Robin Hood. So that is Eustace the monk.
Okay.
Now, Eustace the monk was said to have been born in 1170, and he is listed as being a mercenary, a pirate, an outlaw, and a monk. So he's got an impressive CV. I'd hire him.
Yeah.
And he was born in France, in kind of northern France, around the Calais kind of area. Mm-hmm. He was a second son, so he was a younger son. So he wasn't necessarily in place to inherit. So he actually joined a monastery. Before he joined a monastery, though, he went to Spain, Toledo. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because I'm an uncultured heathen, but Toledo. And like all good, young men, he studied in Spain black magic. So love the idea of, what could I do? Well, I've got to pick my options. Well, I could do geography. I could do history. Oh, there's an option to study black magic. I'll do that. It would make...
The bloke's walking with his girlfriend, the other girl's walking, he's looking over like, okay.
Yeah. It would certainly make Results Day very interesting when someone said that's their future. But our man Eustace, he's gone to Spain, he studied black magic, and apparently, according to a biography of him, no one would believe the marvels he accomplished, nor those which happened to him many times. So apparently,
biography, because that sounds a little bit like what was the nom de plume of him? Was it Eustace? Because no one would believe the marvels that Eustace performed. Oh, I think they would.
So why don't you tell us some? Sadly, I did a little bit of digging and I can't actually find anything about what these marvels are. But apparently he was slightly good at black magic.
No one would believe it. Going the night of your life. Oh, so I could basically do that to myself then. Because honestly, if anyone says something like that, the subtext of that text is prepare to be underwhelmed.
Yeah.
Come on, Eustace, take your chill. Yeah.
I love him already. And so he's gone to Spain, he's messed around a bit doing all these marvels with his black magic, and then he's returned home to France and joined a Benedictine abbey. Mm-hmm. He's become a Benedictine monk near Calais. So the abbey is Saint-Samer Abbey near Calais. But he wasn't actually there that long because he decided he was going to go and avenge his murdered father. So his dad's dead. His dad's probably been murdered. So like a good son.
sense now, isn't it? I think we know why Eustace wanted to do black magic. I think the plot has thickened.
Yeah. So you know what? I'm going to go and avenge my dad. Goes to where his dad is, and there's a big narrative and a big argument with the bailiff and the count of the area, who's Reynald. And basically, he works for the count for a little bit, but then he is told that he's mishandling his stewardship, so he's not very good at looking after the area he's put in charge of. And he's been declared an outlaw. So under medieval law, just like as we see a little bit later, anyone could apprehend and anyone could murder, put to death an outlaw, because they were seen as being outside of respectability, and they're seen as outside of actually almost personhood, I suppose, in a way. So he's been made an outlaw. He's had his lands confiscated. So what does Eustace do? Rather than, fleeing, which would be a very sensible thing to do, he burns down 2 of the mills on his lands and much of his arable land in order to stick 2 fingers up to the count.
I know you love him, but I'm like, Eustace, mate, you've got to calm down. Like that is...
Simmer down, mate, simmer down.
He's got so much to unpack, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's got a lot of issues, bless him. Maybe it's the black magic.
I think it is. Well, seems like the least of his worries at the moment. Yeah,
so he's not actually a pirate at this point. He's an outlaw. He's been a monk. He's practiced black magic, but he's not actually a pirate. So he's a man that's faced with some options. He's lost his lands. He's been made an outlaw. So he becomes a pirate in the English Channel. And he works simultaneously as both a mercenary and a pirate on the hands of England and of France. So there are some times, as you do, there's sometimes where he is working for France and he's, doing piratical activities. I don't think piratical is a word, but he's doing that.
That's what he's doing.
He's doing that. Then he was employed intermittently between 1205 and 1212 against France by King John of England. Now, John is... What could we say about John? We could probably do a whole series about John and his foibles. But for some reason, he really seems to trust Eustace.
Yeah.
At one point, John gives Eustace command of 30 ships and says... What, sorry?
I was just thinking, I was like, he's the judge of character of this man. Like, I've learned a bit about you, Eustace. I've seen, and what I've seen I like. Arsony, all of them. It's like, oh, yeah. But there's something about him. Was he hot? I don't know. But
maybe
I was torching buildings and things. And he's like, my chosen profession is black magic, working for the English. He'd be like... I need to speak to him. He is that walking red flag that all girls like message. At some point in our life,
I could change him. Maybe King John thinks he could change him.
That's what's happening, because we're all like, but he's broken my heart. Then you show a picture of him to someone, they're like, him? That's what you said. Everyone else is doing that. Is like the girl going, yeah, but I really like him. I get him. No, you don't. Nobody does.
No one does. No one does. Not even the tomes of ancient lore get him.
He's not complex. He's just awful. He's a walking flag.
And he is awful, because he's at one point he is playing off England and France. But so he gets these 30 ships from John. John's like, you know what? Absolutely do what you want, as long as you are causing issues for Philip II of France. Yeah. So they're intermittently, he gets his brothers involved at one point as well. He goes to France and goes, do you want to come and work for the King of England with me? And him and his brothers are raiding the Normandy coast. They actually have their base on the Channel Islands. They actually held a castle in Guernsey for quite a long period. And they're raiding the French on behalf of the king. So in many ways, that actually makes them more like privateers in the kind of Golden Age of Piracy idea. But at the same time, when they're not raiding France, they decide to just kind of attack English coastal villages. So they're making a lot of money from this, and they're basically playing off both sides. But they're actually, they're employed by the king to do this, the King of England, and they choose to just raid his land as well. So this is the point where John realizes he's being absolutely shafted, and he briefly outlaws them. So he does outlaw them. So Eustace the monk becomes an outlaw of both Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of France.
And then John fancies him even more because, Lackland loves a bad boy.
Have you heard this story? Because, basically, King John decides that he actually needs Eustace.
Oh, no, I've just lived a life, so I can just see what's coming.
So he un-outlaws him, he pardons him, and he takes him back on. Just to kind of briefly, I don't want to spend too long on Eustace because I think we've got a very good picture of him. But in 1212, he completely switches sides.
Shocking.
And then he switches sides again.
What?
He's raiding Folkestone and the Channel Islands. But when, so slightly after in 1215, when the Civil War kind of broke out with John and that kind of situation, he supports the rebel barons. And he is the person that actually ferries Prince Louis of France across the Channel to help them in 1216. So he is instrumental, really, in stirring the pot during arguably one of England's most unsettled times during the medieval period, certainly in the 1200s.
Yeah.
So he's basically got all his fingers in all his parties. He's making quite a lot of money from it, and John seems to really like him.
I think John's pie is out on the table. I think that's what's happening here. It's sort of metaphorically, it's euphemism. John's got a crush. Like I cannot. And I know. Look, I'm being silly. I'm sure there's other ways. But Eustace has got to have some sort of charisma to be getting them like this because he sounds. But I'm one of those boring people that watches things like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves because it's a classic. I don't mean that makes me boring because Michael Wincott's Guy of Gisborne smoking hot, Anna Rickman untouchable, like delicious. But I do get annoyed when villages are rioted and things because raided because I'm like, look, they've done nothing wrong. There's going to be to tidy up. Like I'm far too sensible. I'm like the damage. Like, everyone's like, oh my God, there's a fight scene. It's really exciting. I'm like, yes. And what about that man's sons and his brothers? And what about the house that's burnt down to the ground? Where are they going to live? What about the geese and the sheep that are terrified? Like, I just hate, I'm like, can't we all just tick along? But it wouldn't make a very good sort of period drama, would it? But Eustace clearly is sort of, he's giving that kind of energy, isn't he? Sort of, let's just go and trap. Why? Well, because we can. You're like, well, there's going to be a lot of admin about this, Eustace. There's going to be a lot to do with, and it's annoying. Please.
I just imagine you being his manager. And it's like, Eustace, you are actually being employed by the King of England. Why are you raiding the coast of England? Eustace.
They are going, give me something to work with that isn't just your fan club of men that seem to fancy you. Like, can we just please have something else rather than English and French king who both clearly want to bang you, Eustace, for whatever reason? Because from images, he looks overrated to me. But hey, it's hard to tell his medieval drawings, isn't it? You can't really tell if someone's hot or not.
As I've said before, most people look like spoons in the medieval drawings. And I don't think that everyone just had evolved to have spoon heads. I just think that maybe they couldn't draw people.
Yeah, I never know. Is there a reason? Are they doing it like, they're obviously exaggerating because there must have been there was beautiful art as well. But I'm like, why? I think the best ones are when their penises are out. They're really, really funny.
Yes, especially when they're hanging over their trousers and it's a little bit like, hey, look what I've got. And it's like, that just looks like a sad face. Put it away. Eustace.
Yeah, Eustace, put your cock away. No one cares. And then Eustace just goes and like burns your house down because you dick shamed him. And you're like, all right, Eustace, fine. He's a nightmare. Anyway, carry on.
Yes, he is a nightmare. And it all comes to head in August 1217. Mm-hmm. So he is ferrying reinforcements for Louis, the French guy. And he's met in the English Channel, in just sailing into Dover, by a man called Hubert de Burgh. Now, Hubert is an amazing name. It's not a very sexy name, is it? But then again, neither's Eustace. So
agony of choice. Yeah.
So you've got the Battle of Dover, and Eustace at first is causing havoc among his allies, his former allies. Mm-hmm. But then the English are able to blind the French with powdered lime, so they cut off any kind of visibility, and then they're able to board the ships and defeat the actual sailors, the French sailors, in hand-to-hand combat. Eustace, however, manages to escape with his flagship and some other ships, but they're surrounded on the 24th of August in the Battle of Sandwich. I know it's a place, but it's just really funny to say the Battle of Sandwich.
Yeah,
I'll grow up.
Sandwich. Yeah.
And there's a big battle. Everything's going, battly, to put it. I'm such a historian.
Historically
And then
yeah.
historically accurate battly. And then they board the ship and they find Eustace hiding in the bottom of the ship, quite cowardly, really. And he offered huge sums of money for his life. So he's trying to bribe them. He realizes that this is the end of his piracy and his, quite frankly, just blasé attitude between the English and the French at a time of already heightened issues between the two countries. And his captors, they say, look, you're not paying out of this. You were hated by the English, you're hated by the French. No one really likes you. So we're going to give you a choice. And they say, we're going to give you the choice between the ship's rail or the side of the trebuchet as his execution site.
Oh my God.
We don't I can't find much instance about what he actually chooses, but he is beheaded.
Oh.
And his brothers survive and they continue to hold the Channel Islands base. So they don't really continue with their piracy, but they still have a little bit of prominence for certainly till about 1220, that kind of time, and then they go back to France. But it's very kind of monumental rise and monumental fall of a man that was, as much as I think, it's what a legend, quite kind of symbolic of that period, I imagine. He doesn't seem to have, or probably asymbolic really, because he doesn't seem to have a particular loyalty. He is a mercenary through and through.
Yeah.
And I think probably one of the biggest mistakes John made was believing he was loyal to England, and equally that he wouldn't sell either country out for the coin, for the money. And, that I think also the reason why I wanted to mention Eustace, other than the fact that he's a monk that practiced black magic and became a pirate,
which is
it sounds like a heavy metal album, really, doesn't it? Is that he is, I think, very much in the same spirit as pirates of the 1700s. They are not bound by any kind of loyalties to countries. They're not bound by any loyalties to place. Their loyalty lies with them and sometimes their crew, but sometimes not even that. So I think Eustace is a great place to start on the image of piracy. There are other instances of piracy in the 12 and 1300s. There are a group that I want to mention briefly called the Victual Brothers. And they were a former trading guild. So they were traders and that kind of thing. I know they said tradesmen then, like they were brickies, but they weren't. And they were a guild of tradesmen that turned to piracy. They were a loosely organized guild of kind of traders. Then they became privateers briefly. And then they later turned to piracy, and they greatly affected maritime trade during the 14th century in the North and the Baltic Seas. Initially, they were hired by the Dukes of Mecklenburg to kind of in a fight against Denmark and Sweden. They actually, probably most famously, they sacked Bergen in 1393, sorry. And that's really the first instance of them turning to pirates and turning to that kind of pirateering and that kind of behavior. They really affect the trade in the Baltic region, in the North and the kind of Baltic Seas. And they have a great number of influence until the late 1390s, 1398, 1399, when the Teutonic Order get rid of them and pretty much reduce them completely into nothing. They do have another major raid on Bergen in 1429 as a kind of a resurgence of them. But after that, again, they seem to disappear into nothing. And I think what's quite interesting about the Victual Brothers is, other than the fact they started off as privateers and traders and they've moved into piracy, is that they also show a lot of the same spirit of the 1700s pirates, is that that's short, sporadic, sharp, rise and fall quite quickly. And if you want to look into them a little bit more, they are really interesting, the Victual Brothers. There's also a really early depiction of a pirate in it's a church in Sweden, in Gotland, Sweden. I can't remember the name of the actual church, though, annoyingly. And they are painted on the wall there. And not only is it the only contemporary representation of the Victual Brothers, it's also a very early depiction of piracy and pirates. So it's really cool to kind of look at. So that's where I'm going to end with the medieval pirates. There is so much more we could have talked about, but I think both of those cases and the Vikings are a really good expression of what piracy was like in the medieval period. A lot of it was opportunistic. A lot of it was linked to various warring countries, particularly countries like France and England that had long-standing arguments and fallouts. When we move into the Golden Age of piracy, so much of that is, again, the same, is that these are people who are opportunistic with regard to old fallouts between countries, but it doesn't tend to be France, it tends to be Spain, certainly in the early 1600s, 1670s, 1680s kind of piracy. And I think it's really interesting to look at the time, what was happening at the time, because it links to what I said earlier, because so much of the Golden Age of piracy, which historians argue is between the 1680s and the 1720s, has come from political upheaval, religious upheaval. Even slightly earlier, the English Civil War was said to have caused an initial wave of piracy as well in Britain. And so much of it is to do with the fact as well that people just didn't have enough money to continue to live a good life, and the sea had a lot of promise for them. So I think it'd be really interesting to turn to the 1700s now and look at pirates in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Are you going to take us through?
So I've got a pirate I've got two pirates I'd really like to talk to you about.
Okay.
One is, he's a little bit of an atypical pirate, but he is arguably known to be the most successful pirate in the 18th century. And another one, because it is me, is a Shropshire example.
Yeah.
So you've got piracy mirroring conflicts over trade, colonialization as well is really linked to piracy. Most pirates, certainly in our context in kind of the Western world, were either Welsh, English, Dutch, Irish, or some of French origin. A lot of them came from areas as well, like London, Bristol, even places within Wales, and it was a way and means of seeking fortune, but it could ultimately as well mean death. So my pirate I want to talk about is Black Sam Bellamy.
Nice. Okay.
So Captain Samuel Bellamy, he was born in 1689 and he died in 1717. And he was, like so many pirates, he was an English sailor and he turned to piracy during the 18th century. He is best known as being the wealthiest pirate in recorded history. And I'd say he was one of the slightly less spoken about pirates in the Golden Age of piracy. So we hear a lot about, Blackbeard and other pirates, but Samuel Bellamy, certainly, I think he's deserving of a place. And he's known as Black Sam because he, in a rather dashing manner, decided he was going to completely eschew kind of the fashionable powdered wig of the era. And instead, he kept his hair long and tied it with a simple band, and he had very dark black hair, so he was a bit of a, a bit of an Adonis.
I mean, the long hair, I'm always...
Yeah, no, me neither. But certainly the ladies liked him. He said he has a number of lovers in the that part of the reason of his downfall was he was going to see his lover. But people liked the fact that he looked different. He didn't have the powdered wigs, and he dressed very fine. He had a real taste for finery. He was known as the Prince of Pirates. And this was because he was incredibly generous. So he liked to liken himself to Robin Hood, we're told. So I think there was an element of PR, like, oh, you look at me, there's the Prince of Thieves, I'm the Prince of Pirates. And even his crew started to call themselves Robin Hood's men.
Oh God, see, that's such an ick. I'm sorry, but that
no, it is a bit, isn't it? Yeah.
You're like, oh, he's got black hair. You're like, but it's long. And you're like, kind of sexy. And you're like, but he thinks he's Robin Hood. And you're like, he's an outlaw. He's like, yeah, but his men call themselves Robin Hood's men. You're like,
no. No, I can see that.
Got the ick. Like, I'm sure he was hot. I'm sure he was smoking hot, but he's also a bit cringe.
I think being a pirate, there's an element of cringe, but you've got to kind of own it, haven't you, I suppose?
Do you remember, I've just got to interject, but do you remember like years ago when Pirates of the Caribbean was huge?
Yeah.
Your face, but I mean, and you'd always got those blokes that thought they looked a little bit like Jack Sparrow, and they did it during the Depp and Amber Heard divorce trial thing a few years ago, and they would all wear eyeliner and kind of like do something like that. And I'm like, have you seen yourself? It's
it's not for me.
It's
no.
That.
It was never, I never, as much as I'd like to run away to see and be a pirate, I don't want to marry a pirate or be around people that think they're pirates.
Yeah. No, it's very cringy. Yeah. Looking like Blackbeard. Blackbeard was quite cool. Captain Jack Sparrow, just, oh God.
Yeah.
Just stop. Ah, God, now I'm angry. Carry on. Please continue with the...
I like Davy Jones in that film where he's all like, do you fear death, Jack Sparrow? That was the worst accent in the world. But... yeah, do you fear death? I liked him. He was an octopus.
He was, because it's Bill Nye. And who's the hot one? Is it Javier? I could never say his name, but Javier, he says something about thinking quicker. He's like, El Capitan. And I'm like, oh. And he's
I don't know. I can't.
His boots on the deck. I've only seen bits. And I'm like, ding dong. And Shane, I can't remember. Oh God, he played Lovejoy or whatever it was in like the 70s or 80s. But that actor, and he plays Blackbeard. And I'm not a big fan of anything clips, but when he says like, someone rose me from my slumber, and he's got this line, and she's like, mutiny captain. And honestly, he's so hot. But the other day, this is a curveball, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but I saw a bishop the other day, and I'm not high church, I'm not Anglican, anything like that, as you know. And he walked in, like, this is for work, and I was like, oh, sorry, is there like, I did not know that a bishop was a vibe. I did not know that. I'm very not like that, as you know. I'm too busy.
I love that.
You're laughing. But he walked in, and everybody he listens to this must let us know, in fact. I'd love it if you got this far into the episode, and if you've got a fetish that you didn't know you had until, like, something like a bishop walks in. And I was like, oh. And he was quite old, and he wasn't hot, but like still,
that's amazing.
With his big bishop's outfit, like he wasn't wearing like all the regalia, he was just wearing a black suit with a big cross. But I was like, oh, and he had rings on more than I would usually find attractive. And
you would be the talk of the village. I love that. Please run away with a bishop.
Hello, like this. And I was like, I can't say where is the bishop of and all this, because that's a little bit too much. But I was like, oh, and I was talking to him, and and he was very, very, very not like that. It wasn't flirty, anything. He was completely normal. I was there like hanging off every word. Like, are you a bishop in his 70s? Hi. But like, yeah, it was a total vibe. And I did not expect it. And I'm very sorry to anybody, Anglican is offended by that, but yeah, because chapel and stuff as a kid in Sunday school, and we just had the minister and things, and he was nut hot. Old bishop walked in, I was like, ding-a-ling.
I love that, honestly.
Yeah,
Become
honestly,
the talk of the village.
Run off with
Run
a-
away with a bishop.
he lives down south, alas. But yeah,
You could run that far. You're running all the time.
that'd
You
be
always
fun.
go and
Head
runs.
down south and get there. I think he'd have a nice wife called Esther or something who'd answer the door of the well, I don't know where bishops live, probably not in rectories, but she'd answer the door and be like, "Hello," and I'd be like, "Hello, is Bishop there?" And I just have to fashion some sort of story. And then, none of that would happen because I'd just get embarrassed. I'd also probably get the ick on the way down. Or he'd do something like answer in just a jumper and like, you know, those dad jeans that are like almost look like rectangles, like because they don't. He'd be wearing those. And he'd be like, "Hello, have we met?" And I'd be like, first of all, I feel really slighted because I literally hosted an evening you were at. But yeah. Secondly, I can't do this. Your fruit of the loom jeans are frightening me. No, but they'd be like Wrangler jeans, but not like the good Wrangler. They'd be, yeah. So anyway, that escalated.
I love it. No, that's amazing.
I love your
can't.
And then
I can't say I've ever looked at a bishop and thought that, but maybe I've not met many bishops.
You're an RE teacher, so it stands to reason you probably met more bishops than me. But
yeah, they don't really like me that much because I look a bit weird, don't I? I talk of the village too.
I look quite basic, so they're probably like, "Who's that little thing? What's she doing?" And I'm like, "I fancy."
Don't look basic.
Yeah, my little Fiat 500 with my cat on a walk, making videos about folklore. But yeah, no, he was a full vibe. So
I love that.
Yeah, make
I
of that.
love that.
I know. So I've been Googling facts about bishops.
So this is where we now announce our next episode will be on bishops and bishoprics.
Don't bring a bishop onto the episode. Person flirting with two previous historians. I would just be like, "Hey, bishop." He'd be like, "You don't have to call me that. You can just call me your grace." And I'd be like, "Oh,
oh, definitely."
If I have an episode of the bishop, it would be a disaster.
Love it. That's so funny.
God,
that's genuinely so funny.
Sorry.
I love that. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
So Black Sam Bellamy, I should say, that's his full name. He only actually was a pirate for a year. But during his pirate career, he captured 53 ships, and he briefly knew Blackbeard. So he was his second in command. But then after Blackbeard and this other guy called Honeygold, which sounds a little bit like what you are, Alix.
Very much so, yeah.
After they were voted out of command, Bellamy thought, right, I'm having enough of this. And he went and captured a ship of his own. And he captured a slave trade ship and took that of his own. And he named it, which I think is a rather bizarre name, the Galley. And it's YWHYDAH Galley. Galley. I'm sure there's some sort of euphemism or something. It is the 1700s. They love dick jokes.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
I know who doesn't. And he took a lot of his piracy round the coast of Massachusetts and kind of all that wider America, Newfoundland area. He was really strict about not harming people.
Okay.
So he's a very rare example of a pirate who doesn't actually harm people. Obviously, people would have got harmed when he's sinking ships and things like that, but he would never shoot. There's always damage, but he wouldn't purposefully go out to harm anyone. And if you wanted to be a part of his crew, he also said that you shouldn't harm anyone. So he was really strict about that. And he gave a lot of the money that he actually stole away to other people. Obviously, there's an element of him keeping some for himself and his crew, but there is evidence of charity and things like that. So he is a bit atypical to other pirates. We're told that as a captain, his leadership was almost democratic. So he would have things like votes on actions and usually allowed other people to decide as well as him, which you do see mirrored in other accounts of different famous pirates. His crew were said to actually be quite fond of him, and one of the things I love is we get a really vivid description from a contemporary about how he dressed. So other than having the long black hair, he was a dashing figure in his long, deep cuffed velvet coat, knee breeches, silk stockings, and silver buckled shoes, with a sword slung on his left hip and 4 pistols on his sash. Unlike some of his fellows, Bellamy never wore the fashionable powdered wig, but grew his dark hair long. And we're told that he used a pirate flag with a black ensign, with Death holding an hourglass in one hand and a trumpet in the other, which is it's pretty cool, isn't it? He cuts quite a snappy figure, and he certainly knew how to make an impression, we're told. And so within the year, he's a pirate for a year. He's captured these 53 ships, and then he gets hit up in a storm off Cape Cod on the 26th of April, 1717, is driven into a sandbar, and there's water at the time during this storm. It's a really brutal one of up to 150 meters, and he capsized, and he and all but 2 of the crew, and it was a 146-man crew, drowned. Interestingly, his story kind of continues in 1984 because they actually find the wreckage of the ship. And it was one of the first, if not the first, authenticated pirate shipwreck that was ever discovered in North America. And it had the largest prize at the time of its sunk ever captured. It had 4.5 to 5 tons of indigo, ivory, gold, and 3,000 pounds sterling silver, divided into 180 sacks of 50 pounds, so like 23 kilograms each. So it was no wonder it sunk if it was carrying all that stuff.
It's done well. Yeah, that's insane. Yeah.
And it's mad to think that in a year he was able to accrue that much wealth and that much I suppose power as well within, because he was known to be a very well-known pirate that gained a lot of respect from the more notable ones like Blackbeard and things like that. And it's interesting because had the sea not claimed his life, in all likelihood he probably would have ended up going down the same way as a lot of other pirates did, and ended up being captured by the English, or ended up, in prison or within the bloody codes, actually hanging for his crime. So I think Bellamy in a lot of ways is very similar to a lot of the stories we have of piracy at the time, of it being a way that you can become a self-made man, that a lot of people are drawn to it through the promises of gold. But his actions were quite atypical, particularly with his stressor of non-violence, and I mean, that self-styled, rather cheesy Robin Hood of the Sea kind of image. He probably quite enjoyed that image, but certainly you can see where some of that came from. So, yeah, I think he's rather interesting. And I think he certainly is a bit of a character. And I think so much of the history of piracy is about these characters. They're people who might be a bit morally grey. They're people who have all these multitudes that burst off the pages of history that even today we have very strong images of.
Yeah, no, I think that's really fair. I think morally grey might be a slight understatement. I think is
no, that's me being a little bit fair to them all.
I think it's because you love them, and I think that's very fair. I think it's interesting because there's such a piece super of time romanticism about neither action seemed swashbuckling and exciting, and we're like, oh, they did this and they did that, and they won, and even descriptions of their accoutrements and their outfits and things are so specific, and yet clearly romanticized as well, and they are shrouded in myth and sex appeal and all these things. Of course, no matter what they do, they're elusive. There is nothing elusive about torching a building and
oh, he's so mysterious. Look how he burns down that barn.
Look, he torched that burn, he's given that bird a venereal disease. Oh, he ain't half mysterious. Is he?
And that is the reality of it, is so much of it is tied into things like venereal disease. I couldn't think of anything, but you summed it up.
Doesn't everything just come back to venereal disease? But it's true, because it's, and I know we're going to do an episode on the history of sex appeal, but actually, in fact, did we need to? Because the pirates are exactly that. They've got this myth that surrounds them. But actually, what's fascinating about them, of course, is that they had the myth at the time. It's like people idolizing the Bloomsbury set. And I just, honestly, I know this is historically awful and very bigoted to say, but the Bloomsbury set make me cringe. It's anyone who's like, playing at poverty or playing or whatever.
Yeah.
God, you're tone deaf. Can you please just... And I know that was the idea of it, but it's so cringy. And I find like pirates, I think they're fascinating. And I think that there was huge socio-economic movements. It's much more nuanced, but I think this idea of like the swashbuckling, buccaneer and all the rest of it. Would I sleep with one? Almost certainly. Absolutely. I'm not going to put myself above it. Would I definitely have had a crush on Edward Teach, Blackbeard? Yeah. God, yeah. God, yeah. I'd be like, I've got dark hair. You've got dark hair. You got little candles in your beard. Let's make a dark-haired baby, huh? And then he's like, yeah, I'll do that. Then you won't see him for dust. You'll just see him and his little cindered beard running off into the distance. And like,
bye now.
Yeah, bye-bye then. I don't even think you get a goodbye. I think
no, you probably wouldn't, no.
Because, you get the old, like, J Blog's nice guy next door, his barn's been torched, going, bloody hell, what have I, like, what? And then they're like, oh my God, that pirate. It's like when a highwayman or something is a bit dishy. You're like, yeah, but he does also rob people at the dead of night on a road, doesn't he? And you're like, yeah, I know, but have you seen him in those trousers?
I could change him. I think that's the thing. And I think pirates are criminals. And regardless of the way you want to, even people like... Bellamy, who, oh, look at me, I do give money and I don't kill people, you're a criminal. And yes, the socioeconomic factors of the era were pushing people to that criminality, both at sea and, in England. But they're still capable of these rather awful acts of brutality to each other, to, naval officers, and also on land as well. And I think it is so much of our idea of piracy does come from, swashbuckling novels of the 1900s, and also even things like old Hollywood and things like that. But I think also that's what pushes this fascination with them, because still they've had a bit of a resurgence probably in the last 15 years of people being interested in them. But we're sat here talking about them. So, it's all of their intricacies. I imagine they're not the sort of people that would imagine that they had intricacies, some of them, but all of their intricacies make them more compelling. How can someone be so brutal, but then also have things like democracy on the boat and treat men as equals? You have instances of, I found an account, and it was from, I think it was the late 1700s, and it was, they were called pirates, and they were being wanted off the coast of Devon, and there was a description of all these pirates, if you see them, kind of thing. And there was men of African heritage, there was men of Cornish heritage, and they were all, it said in the actual account that they had this kind of egalitarian nature on the ship, but if they was to be found, they would be, punished and things. And it's this idea that there's a camaraderie amongst them, whilst also they would be the first to shoot them if you stepped out of line. And it's those intricacies. I think that's what's so fascinating about the Vikings as well, is through that kind of smog of time, there's so much intricacy, yet also you can look at them and go, well, that was deplorable.
I think that's a really well articulated, really interesting point. I'm going to poo-poo it here, because not in a, just in terms of, I think we do the same, like the honor amongst thieves. And I think tangible modern in inverted commas example I can think of is the craze. So you have this generational thing of people going, oh, they only hurt their own. They didn't hurt women, didn't hurt children, only hurt their own. And you're like, did they? Did they only hurt their own? Are you sure they didn't beat their wives? Are you sure they were great to dogs? I think it's bollocks. I think the nuance is, but I think there will be some camaraderie. But I think that camaraderie is laughter based on fear. I think most of that crew.
I do agree with you there, actually. That is,
jesting on a podcast. I think they were running a reign of terror, and I think they were masters of PR. I think just in the way like Henry VIII wanted to be seen as the jolly monarch when he wasn't chopping his wives' heads off. I think it screams of that kind of ego. If they're like, hey, I'm cruel when I need to be. Mate, if you're capable of that level of cruelty, you're a cruel person. Like,
yeah.
You're calling on a level of barbarity and cruelty that we cannot fathom. You are running a reign of terror and going, I'm quite charismatic. And these guys, they love a laugh, don't they? And the men are like, yes, I'm laughing, while a sword's just in their back prodding, going, say, it's funny.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the nuances of us looking, going, they're complicated because they're nice, but they're not. I'm not sure they were that nice. I'm sure they were funny. I've no doubt. I'm sure they were charismatic. I'm sure they had sex appeal, all the rest of it. But I think it is a very human attribute that I've done, you've done, we've all done it. We've all done it when you've fancied the wrong person and gone, but they're nuanced. No, they're not. No, they're not. And you're like, I don't know, this person feels like this because they just like me too much. No, they don't. Like it's, and I think we do the same with pirates, with whomever. We romanticize it by our human nature because we make very often things like that more complicated than it is. They were men who wanted money, power, didn't want, and I don't mean commitment as in just relationships. I mean commitment to anything. They were a lot of the time ostracized by their own making, and it suited them to be in the seas, to have the reputation, everything that came with the danger, all that, the fear. I think they weren't that complicated. I don't think they had poets' souls and all the rest.
No.
And even like Lord Byron, he was fantastically talented and wonderfully gifted, but also just loved shagging, giving people venereal disease. It's like there's a lot we can mask behind what is basically charisma, and we're like,
no, you are right,
and I've done it. And I still do it to this day. I'll fancy someone on the telly and go, oh, I bet he's so complicated, isn't he? No, he's an actor. He's probably neurotic and highly strung and self-centered, but let's create an image for him the way we all do. I think that actually is more fascinating than pirates. What is our necessity to find people so sexy? Robin Hood has survived the test of time because everyone's like, he robbed the rich and gave to the poor. You're like, did he?
Yeah. Do we know that?
Do we know that that's a fact? I mean, if he didn't be a Susie Page, because does that seem realistic to you that somebody was that wholesome? You're like, I think there's a big old Me Too coming for him. I think it's one of those where if you delve too deep, you're going to go, well, probably not even that deep. You're going to go, oh, that's nuanced. I think nuanced is the new word for that's a bit fucking inappropriate. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just a bitter old cynic. But I think the older I get, the more I'm sort of thinking, a lot of the time, particularly with these sort of typically masculine roles, that actually they were kind of fleeing sort of, the conventions of normal life. And we were like, oh, you're a buccaneer, you're a bachelor, you're exciting. But if a woman did that, she was a fallen woman and she was, it's the old telltale, isn't it? But it is fascinating. And I think both are valid points.
And I think like you said, there's a reason why people don't flee the country unless there's a reason that they're fleeing something.
Exactly.
I used it as a joke at the beginning, but if I hadn't had a bad lesson, would I be thinking how great it would be to go and run away to sea? No, it's the bad lesson that is. I'm not actually going to go and do it. I can't swim very well. But
pirate ships, no, mate, no.
Yeah, no. But they are leaving something behind. They're leaving criminality behind to get a new kind of criminality, or they're leaving families behind. They're leaving something behind. The socioeconomic factors are part of it, but it's also to do with the character of that person. And I do think that is important to stress, that so many of these were like what you've said.
But their clothes were sexy. That's what we're looking at here. Look at, and this isn't a sexy example, obviously, but Dick Van Dyke as a chimney sweep. When he's like, I loved what I do. It's like, do you? Because that would have been like grueling, unpleasant, very hard, relatively or comparatively low paid work for very little reward. Would you have been dancing on the rooftops like that? I doubt it. I think we do it with everything, don't we? And we do it today with things. We watch things on Instagram. We're like, oh, by heck, they're a bit dishy, aren't they? And you're like, yeah, but they still do all the things. That is human nature. And if we didn't do that, we would never fancy anyone, and then we'd never have kids. But I think it's look at me with the bishop. Who am I to get high? I'm not even Anglican. I think, and not to go all Freudian about it, I think largely it's this sort of sexual desire that's at the base of so much stuff. And that's been going since the dawn of time because, look at the Victorians, they would have fetishized all these things from, Lady Jane Grey and all the, these dramatic images in the cellar and things like that. She wasn't executed in a cellar, even to where they wanted Anne Boleyn, marking the execution site. It's in the wrong place. We romanticize, fetishize, that's human nature because the humdrum of reality is very, very dull. You've got to fetishize these people because if you thought they were just men that probably stank of piss, semen and had scurvy, they wouldn't be as appealing, would they? Who basically all kept company with each other and probably did a shit over the deck into the sea. It's not as appealing, is it, as the idea of these big boots and this brooding, smouldering, so that's why we do it, because the reality isn't sexy. So we have to, all of us, create a sex appeal that seems exciting and inviting to us.
They would have all smelled like piss. You are right.
They would, and they'd all be the things that all men do, but that would all be on a ship for months on end. That place would smell like a debauched prison loo.
Yeah.
On there going, let's get on here and watch them bathe and how exciting it'd be, and they're all there with their big bare chests. No, like they'd have scurvy, they'd stink, they'd be pissed, they'd be like I say, they'd be doing a poo over the deck. Like it would be grim, it would be bleak, it would be very unpleasant. They were abandoning people, they were abusing one another, they would have left people at docks, they'd have all got off and given venereal diseases, got venereal diseases, they'd have been drunk. It would have stunk. It would have been horrible. It's exactly the same as, like, say, when we people immortalise the Krays. You're like, they just went around London kicking the shit out of people and they shot somebody square in the head or wherever it was in a pub. Like, these are not nice guys. They're like, yeah, but you see their suits. And you're like, okay, great. Well, I'm sure if Jack the Ripper wore a dashing suit, which some Jack the Ripper tours and televised things, he did, that's what they're like. They're like, he had a dashing suit. And also, of course, they've come from the right period of history, apart from the medieval. But, that golden age of piracy is exactly the period of history that we want, that Hollywood grabbed, that is romantic, these great big ships, these amazing, wigs, all this stuff.
Yeah.
What's under that wig? They had scurvy. They probably had ringworm. Those guys would have been bleak. Even the ones that were all right would have probably still been a bit bloody grim.
And whiffy.
Yeah, if you think about Tudor monarchs were carrying sweet smelling things around them, so they, for smells and things, what on earth must pirates have smelled like? I'm just going to say it. Look at me, I'm a right laugh, aren't I? Sit next to me at a dinner party.
I know, I love the idea of you opening a conversation with, what on earth would pirates have smelled like?
Yeah, that's what I'd be like.
No, but you are right. You've hit the nail on the head completely.
Killjoy. Like I said, I was going to say, if someone's like, oh, did you see my husband? He's lovely. I'm like, with the bald chap with no personality. No, you could do much better. He's a personality vacuum. You're a charismatic, beautiful woman. Whoever it is that's talking, you're wasting your time. They'd be like, that girl is weird. But yeah. We all do. And you and I with our slippy socks, if anyone, we get lovely messages and people are very kind on Instagram and stuff like that. And I'm like, mate, we go home with a glass of wine, a cup of tea and slippy socks. There ain't nothing folkloric and sexy about our lives, but it's fine. It's great because to me, I like the normality of that because I think the smoke and mirrors is just that. And the thing is, it could probably lead on to rather nicely, and I didn't engineer it that way, but hey, look how fate takes us on these journeys, to the myths versus reality of debunking pirates. Buried treasure, crock of shit.
Yeah.
You love this. I mean, I'm going to follow this up with, you had a very academic section. I'm now, let's myth v reality.
No, I love it. I love it because this is so exciting.
You're so kind.
Drop some truth bombs. Drop them.
Pirates would have smelled of semen and piss. What's next? You're like... You're a nice guy. You should come meet my mum. You sound great. So the idea of pirates burying treasure with an X, I'm sure most of us know this, is largely nonsense. Of course, pirates would loot things and put them in certain places. The idea of burying them and having a map and going back for them in 10 years' time is far more convoluted. The sea was very difficult to navigate. The chance of people doing that and then finding it again is a crock of shit. It was largely popularised by Robbie Stevenson, of course, in Treasure Island, which is, again, a little bit like walking the plank as well. So there is actually very little evidence for pirates walking the plank they did do things like marooning people, keel hauling, where they would drag them under the keel of the ship, which is really pretty unpleasant.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Could be fatal as well, and probably often was. But walking the plank is largely, not only is it impractical, nonsensical, but it's not nearly any kind of evidence to indicate that was something. Perhaps, probably, I imagine, Amy, one of the reasons you want to go to sea is pirate speech. So,
yeah.
I'm not going to do this sounding like someone off the episode of The Crown. The stereotypical pirate phrase, like, "Arr, matey." If anybody ever has like seen our Instagram things and thought, I've got a bit of crush on those Shropshire witches, and they've just heard me say "arr" and "matey," they've got the ick. Are Hollywood inventions, obviously, because like I love the Americans, of course, but if anyone was going to have an idea of what somebody from the West Country sounded like, what a pirate sounds like, they went "arr, matey, me hearties," and you're like, they don't. Why would they talk like that? They're not.
Yes,
they're not stupid. And it was largely Long John Silver, with his phallic-esque name in the 1950s adaptation of Treasure Island. I'm afraid it's nonsense. We do have things like the Kraken, Davy Jones's locker. We have talked about these in our sea episode. Davy Jones's locker does loom quite large for pirates, which I love this. I think some of the legendary pirates, Blackbeard, so Edward Teach, he's got to be one of my favourites.
He's cool, yeah.
He is cool. I think everybody's
stinky, but
stinky, smart seaman and piss, but he was cool. So Blackbeard was, of course, famous. So he was for his black beard. Edward Teach, but he's probably a Bristolian, born around 1680. Came from a relatively middle class family. Funny enough,
I didn't know that.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he died in 1718. In North Carolina, and his pirate career, they say, was between 1716 and 1718, so actually relatively short considering how famous he was. But you mentioned this earlier with the short 12 months. I think pirates were actually pirates for a relatively short time, a little bit like cowboys. The actual Wild West was really only over about a decade, wasn't it? Whereas like the proper like Wild West, I think a lot of these things like Tombstone and saloons and all this stuff, it's all very much romanticized. I don't think you could live those dangerous lives for longer than about
yeah,
either dying or just going into hiding or having PTSD. His ship, very famously, of course, was the former French slave ship La Concorde, which was the Queen Anne's Revenge. And that's a very famous, and I used to pretend when I was in the bath as a kid that I was on the Queen Anne's Revenge.
I love that. That's cute.
Such a geek. And it was the West Indies and the North Coast of America. And he was famous for his fearsome appearance and his daring exploits. He did play to his fearsome appearance. He would tie slow burning fuses into his beard and he'd light them during battles, creating a terrifying image of smoke and fire. He'd also often carry multiple pistols and swords. So God knows how many arms and hands he had. But in hard some reputation. Again, I'm sorry, I love Blackbeard, but what a fucking ick. Because like to have all that black hair, but like, hey guys, let's dispel this. He went to a mirror or whatever was equivalent and turned those fuses into his beard, and he's like,
yeah.
And he probably lit them to see what they looked like before battle, just to see what they looked like, like going, I'm just going to see what this looks like. Did it and went, yeah, that's going to scare the shit out of them. And then there's a battle happening. They're like, Captain, where are you, Captain? And he's like, I'm busy. I'm and he's doing fuses. And it's an ick, but also a risk, because he could have opened that sort of cabin door and gone, like that. And they'd be like, well, sorry, are you wearing fucking fuses?
You look like a twat.
They'd be like, no, mate, sorry. Mutiny by all of us, because this is an absolute laugh. But like they
maroon me, mate.
This guy is an absolute, like, it's ridiculous. But I just love it. I just love the whole reality of that. As at some point, he's had a trial and error of burning those in his beard to see what looks good.
Yeah.
He just bursts out with those burning in his beard on a fluke. That he has been honing that act, and that is a walking ick in my mind.
It's so much showmanship, but in the wrong sense of the word, isn't there, with these pirates? Is that there's like, I'm going to put on a show, but they've had to think that through, and they've had to go, right, well, I'm a pirate. How can I make myself look big and scary? I've got a beard. I'll do that. And it's like, I can't imagine. I think it humanizes them in a way to think that they are sat down at some point thinking how to make themselves look cooler.
This is like people who say, "Oh, I'm so laid back, mate." If you say you're laid back, you're not laid back. I'm just going to say it. Like, I'm just going to say, if you call it laid back or bohemian or whatever, like, I just go with the flow. You fucking don't, because if you say that, then you don't, do you?
Like, I say I go with the flow, and I'm riddled with anxiety. So you are right there.
In my life, never in my life. I'm too busy making lists and giving you reasons why pirates give you the ick. Yeah, I don't go with the flow, but I'm happy to admit that. I'm what you call a realist, and that is not a spoiler for I'm secretly romantic. No, I think it's very, very funny. But I think, like I say, it's fearsome, it's frightening, it's sexy on telly, and you're like, is it?
Because a man with fire on his beard.
He was upstairs 2 minutes ago weaving fuses into his. I can tell you, he's been doing that for a while to see what it looks like. It's not. Hot. No. That's like those sort of smouldering selfies that we've all got. And you're like, yeah, but they haven't seen the 135 others thinking I've got a good selfie, but one eye's closed, or I'm blinking, or I've got a double chin, whatever it may be. All these things. We're all Blackbeards, really. It's just that he kind of pushes it to the forefront, goes, "Aren't I sexy?" And it's like, not really. I think about like how hot Bill Sykes is. And then I remember he still would have had to go for a poo at some point, and that would have been awful. So like, nobody is sexy all the time. It just doesn't happen. He was in a fierce battle led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. And old Maynard here, Blackbeard reportedly sustained 5 gunshot wounds. And this bit, I smell bollocks, really. 20 sword cuts before dying. Yeah. I'm sorry. I know he's got fuses in his beard, but if you were shot 5 times and cut 20 times...
I'm pressing the bullshit button. I wish I had one, but I'm pressing it.
There's like Rasputin, and they're like, "Oh, we did this," and he went into the water, and when they pulled him out, there was still water in his lungs. Shut up. He'd been shot in the head in numerous places. Shot 5 times. Unless they shot him 5 times, 1 in each toe. Blackbeard not shot 5 times and still alive. Shot 5 times and 20 sword cuts. What were the sword cuts? Are they cutting his hair?
They're cutting the fuses out of his beard.
Yeah, they blew his toes off and they cut the fuses out of his beard.
Yeah, that's unsafe. Cut out.
And now he's dead. How did he die? He tripped and fell down the steps. His severed head was hung from Maynard's ship as a warning to other pirates. So fair, they love doing that.
That's pretty metal. That's like cover of a metal album. Yeah.
But also, I love that the pirates and stuff like that, with all that smoking stuff, and then you just get some sort of like probably buttoned up, rigid old lieutenant, and he's like, "Right, here's his head," and you're like, "God, you're the actual nut."
Yeah, you're metal. Like,
never mind, like the pretty guy with the the we and the seaman smile. This lieutenant's proper scary. What is interesting as well is, again, as people always add, there's no verified accounts of Blackbeard harming his captives. Yeah, well, that's like when people are taken hostage and they're like, "I'm being treated very well."
Yeah.
Because like the appearance is saying something else. Other bits and bobs that I find really interesting is earrings. Pirates did wear them because there was a lot of superstition believing in things like that they prevented seasickness. Some people even believe they improved eyesight. And also very often, and most common, and here's the practicality, they actually wore earrings because it served as a form of payment for a proper burial. If they died ashore, you could take the silver or the gold out of their ear and use it as payment. It's claimed they adhered to the pirate code. I think that is slightly fancified, the way
Yeah.
I think that's honor amongst thieves, which I think is a caveat for shit, basically. It's a bit like parlay and all this kind of stuff when they're calling it in Pirates Caribbean. They're like parlay, and you're like, is that realistic? I think Shakespeare as well was another one that was interesting in terms of thinking of pirates as well, because of course Hamlet, you don't actually see the pirates, but Hamlet's ship is attacked by pirates, of course, as we all know, and leads to his capture and his subsequent return to Denmark. It's off stage, but it's still a big part of the play. And Antonio, a sea captain, rescues Sebastian in a course, drumroll, 12th Night, and is often interpreted as a pirate. And I always think his affection for Sebastian and his willingness to risk his life does add complexity to his character, but also to their relationship. I find it fascinating. But look, I've banged on. Go on. What have you got for us as I'm going on so much?
No, it's fascinating. This will be where I finished. Want to mention a Shropshire pirate.
Yes, go on.
Because Shropshire is, as we mentioned in our sea episode, a landlocked county, but it also has a lot of links to the sea through the River Severn. The River Severn was a means of trade in the area. All along the River Severn was some of the first places to get spices in the west side of the country and other things like that, coffee, cocoa. And so it has been quite instrumentally linked to the sea in its history. So we've got a chap who is called Sir Henry Mannering. For some reason, it took me forever to learn how to pronounce that last name, but it is Mannering.
Mannering makes you think army. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's, yeah, my dad said exactly the same thing.
Made me feel...
No, you're not as, yeah, no. He was the one that told
your dad. I know you then. You know, you're not as old as my dad. I know.
Yeah. You're older, you're 173.
Yeah, much older. Yeah, I know your dad's going, hang on, she's like 2 centuries older than me.
She's a ghost. She is a ghost, yeah. That is the plot twist of the century, is that this podcast is entirely manned by ghosts.
This is how I know about pirates, because I was there. So.
You were there. You did. You were in the docks.
It does. I am giving that I was hurt by a pirate, doesn't it? Like, did a pirate help you, Alex? Yes, they did.
Who was it?
It was Edward Teach.
Knew it. So this guy is slightly before, Henry Mannering is before what we would consider the Golden Age of piracy. He was born in a place called Ightfield in Shropshire. In 1586 or 7, because records are always a bit iffy. Interestingly, his grandfather built Ightfield Manor, and there's a folk story that states that there's an avenue of trees that are planted on the run up to Ightfield Manor, which is now a private home, and the devil and this other Mannering planted them in a night in a competition. So the family itself, the Mannering family, are fascinating. You've got kind of lawyers, you've got MPs, all sorts. So they are a really interesting family. But Henry, he was so a lawyer, a soldier, a writer, a seaman, a politician, a privateer, and a pirate.
Yeah.
So he's been busy, and his nickname, which is going to give you the ick, is the Dread Pirate.
Oh, fuck off. I bet he made that nickname up himself. I know that. Yeah, 100%.
He sat there for hours, like, oh, what can I be? Oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah, people
will fear me. And
I've got to just jump it, just because. Do you know what are they called? There's a really funny. I follow them on Instagram. They're really funny, and he does this video calling himself, like, about when people make up their nicknames, and he calls himself A1, and he's so funny. Oh, that's good. Oh, ski comedy. What the hell is he called? They're called Ski and something, but he's honestly, he's so funny. I think it's Dirk and Ski. That's what they're called. Fun. Yeah. Ski_comedy and Dirk and Ski. They're really, really funny. But he does a series of like little sketches about people that give themselves nicknames. That's literally what that pirate's giving. I'm obsessed.
It is.
It's really fun.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's like when I was 13 and I went through the goth phase. I was like, I want to be called like Ebony Raven Meadow Shadow. I didn't want to be, but most people did. And I was on Vampire Freaks, like, lol, I'm going to be Dark Princess 72 or something. It's giving teenage goth, really, isn't it?
You know what I used to just in stark contrast to this, to prove that I'm always the basic witch in this party. Mine was Lexi, darling.
Oh, that's sweet. What was mine?
Mine's cringier than yours.
I think I was Amy Von Count at one point, because I was like, her Count Von Count's funny.
Oh god, mine was also Fox and Beagle. That's ridiculous. Those two things don't go together. But and it was the Hotmail #Hootmail days, and I was Hootmail, and I was also I was also Lexi, darling, and that makes me die. And then I changed it to obviously just my name, Alix Chidley-Uttley, because I used to have to phone people in the end as I got a little bit older, like early 20s, and I was going, it's Lexi, darling, at Hotmail. I was like, no, fuck this, it's got to stop. It went.
That, yeah, no, I have a cringe email story too, just briefly. So when I was 12 and 13, I was in a heavy metal band. We weren't heavy metal, we were children. Pardon?
Called?
We were called like Absolution or something like that, or like shadows of I can't really remember. I'll ask my friend Georgie. But we created this like cringe MySpace with band practice pictures, and none of us could play our instruments as well, which is, you know, pretty metal in itself.
Yeah.
And we all decided we were going to give ourselves email addresses in case like Metallica or something wanted to sign us.
Oh, well,
So,
likely. So good you prepared for that.
yeah, we were prepared for Metallica. So we all had like our name and then the instrument we played. So I was amy.bassist at hotmail.com for a very long time. And it got to
Hootmail.
and it got to the stage where I was in my early 20s and I thought, I can't play the bass. I have not played it since I was 14. I should probably create a new email address. And it's really weird how our generation clinged on to our cheesy email addresses, because we could have just made a new one.
Yeah.
It's free. You can do it. It takes 2 minutes. Even a Luddite like me can make an email address, but no, I'm going to stick to this one I made when I was 12. Yeah, so Metallica never called. They didn't sign us. And then we stopped making music in about 6 months after. So that's my brief music career.
Yeah, God, what could it have been? It would have been so close. Like, I can't believe it. It's just,
you'd have thought it. You'd have thought that I would have been musical talent. Yeah.
Just be, yeah, God. Oh, what came so close to you?
Yeah, but
what happened?
Within my grasp, but I missed it. It's what could have been. But let's move back to Mannering.
Please do.
The pirate. Yeah, because he's another one like Eustace the monk that just seems to be a law unto his own. So he's born in a very wealthy family. His grandfather was, on his maternal side, was Vice Admiral of Sussex, as you do. And he graduates from University of Oxford, where he gets his BA in law at 15 in 1602, becomes a lawyer for a bit, and then he becomes a soldier for a little bit in the Low Countries during some conflicts there, becomes a sailor, and then eventually turns to piracy. So he has a really good reputation for a lot of his history, for his early life. At the age of 24, because he's in such a high regard, the Lord High Admiral of Nottingham commissions him as a privateer to capture the arch pirate, which again is given 13-year-old Goff, Peter Easton. And Peter Easton was a pirate around Newfoundland, and he was quite notorious at the time. And he had docked and was kind of bubbling around. Bobbing is the word I should say. He's bobbing around the Bristol Channel.
I bet he loved that description.
Yes, he'd be so proud of me right now. So Peter Easton is around the Bristol Channel in Britain, and the Lord Admiral of Nottingham has got Mannering to go and try and capture him. He gives him a ship, a small but speedy ship, and he gives him a small crew. So they sail out from Bristol. There's no sign of Easton, the pirate. He tells his crew when they reach the Straits of Gibraltar that he had no intention of finding the pirate. He had no intention of doing anything but fighting the Spanish.
Yeah. What a plan. Yeah.
So rather than do what he's been commissioned to do, and there are some historians and some references to say perhaps this has been what the Lord High Admiral wanted and he was being more of a privateer, but there's no real evidence of that. The evidence seems to be that Mannering got to the Strait of Gibraltar and just went, actually, you know what? Let's go and piss off the Spanish for a bit. I'm going to be a pirate. So he does his pirateering. He causes issues for the Spanish for ages, sails his fleet of captured ships to Newfoundland. He becomes the best kind of in the area, and he actually steals the pirates who he was commissioned to capture his base in Harbour Grace in Canada, and raids the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the French. So he's a busy man.
He's on it.
He's on it. And the English try and contact him, but he just is ignoring his boss. I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah.
He becomes a really feared pirate, and he becomes so feared that the Spanish actually offer him a pardon in return for his services in the Spanish flag. So they've said to him, you are terrifying, you're too much, mate. If you work for us, we will completely forget the fact that you've been robbing us and bombing our ships and all that kind of thing.
Guerrilla army, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so he does that for a little bit, but then obviously he's gone against England.
Mm-hmm.
So he, at one point, his activities that were entirely self-serving, it's that idea of a very young, gallant man running off to sea and finding his fortune and pissing everyone off in the process. It almost breaks the peace that was very tenuous at the time between England, Spain, and Portugal.
Yeah.
James I actually threatens to send a fleet after Mannering because he's causing that many issues for them. And it's only in 1616 that he's granted a royal pardon because he saved a Newfoundland trading fleet around Gibraltar from another pirate.
Mm-hmm.
So he's pardoned by the king. He comes back to England and he writes a book on piracy in 1618. And this book was quite a bestseller, really. And there's a wonderful, wonderful quote in it where he says that if he was to talk about everything he's done, he could easily be evidence, jury, judge, and executioner to himself.
Mm.
And it really does, it works kind of as an encyclopedia for how to stop pirates. In his book as well, he gives evidence and talks about what might cause a desperate man to turn to piracy based on some of his supposed conversations with other pirates, completely neglecting the fact that he wasn't a desperate man. He was given a job and he decided to do the opposite. It gets better, though. He becomes the representative to England at one point, to the Venetian Republic, and also he was knighted in Woking on the 20th of March, 1618. He's brought into the Royal Navy because under their idea is that he's been a pirate, so he would be able to help the Royal Navy understand piracy. And eventually, we are skipping well forward into his life, but he becomes Vice Admiral before leading the Navy, so he actually ends up being in charge of the Navy in 1639. He is a royalist, so during the English Civil War, he was exiled to France and he died in poverty. And he was buried in St. Giles's Church in London in 1653. So you've got this man that straddles a really kind of quite difficult time in English history. You've got him basically taking advantage of the wars with the Spanish to make his own fortune. You've got him doing the opposite of what the English crown seems to want him to do by, rather than capturing pirates, becoming one. But he somehow still manages to have this meteoric rise through, when he's pardoned, through the Navy to becoming the head of the Navy,
I mean, which is, you know why that is?
Yeah.
Okay, baby. Like that.
Yeah.
As soon as I was like, he's a Nepo baby, like that.
Yeah, he is. And that is the case. I think if it had been, Joe Bloggs, who was born and raised in the Bristol docks, he'd have hung for it. But because he's a gentleman pirate, he ends up being quite
well off. Ranks and was in with the king. Yeah, weird.
Yeah, and his downfall is the English Civil War. So I think it's fascinating to look at this man because not only is he quite atypical to some pirates that we might be more used to, there was one quote that I read and it likens his piracy to kind of the Grand Tour of the 1700s, that idea that he's a young man that wants a bit of adventure, so he decides to go and become a pirate. And I can see the similarities there. Is it's entirely self-serving, it's entirely to make his own mark.
I mean, a rapper, you're like, sure, tell me about your time on the streets.
Yeah, and I just think, mate, he's a fascinating chap, but probably not someone I'd like to spend much time with. But it's interesting to look at him because he typifies kind of Shropshire's link to naval history to the sea and to the sorts of things we've been talking about.
He does, but he also typifies that classic, timeless, still going trope of the posh boy.
Oh, yeah.
Away from what my family does until it becomes inconvenient, and then I phone my dad and all is fine.
Dad, can you save me? Because I'm in a bit of trouble. Yeah. I don't think it'd have been as easy to get a pardon if he'd have been from anywhere but a stately home in Shropshire. Yeah.
I know. I thought it was the nuance. No, he was a Nepo baby, but it's a story. Because we've got a long episode. Let's quickly tear through now a couple of the iconic phrases and their origins. Shiver my timbers. Okay, so this expresses surprise or disbelief. Shiver. Obviously, we know it's to break into pieces, and timbers refers to the wooden ship frames. It's likely a literary invention, and unfortunately it did appear in print in the late 18th century, but was popularized by, again, Treasure Island, and is likely to have actually been said by pirates. Avast is derived from the Dutch term hound vast, meaning hold fast. Avast was used by sailors to command others to stop or cease what they were doing. Over time it became a general call for attention amongst seafarers, so that is a real one.
That's cool.
Yeah, ahoy. Do you know what I love about ahoy is before hello on telephones, they were going to say ahoy, ahoy, wasn't it? It was one of the options, and they went with hello instead, because hello didn't exist really prior to the phone. So sometimes you see in early period dramas, they say hello. It's like they wouldn't have said that. It came about around about the time of the telephone. But ahoy was going to be the original answering a phone. We would have gone ahoy, ahoy.
Imagine.
I know. Well, we would never have known any different. But imagine if they changed it now and went, ahoy, ahoy. You'd be like, yeah, I'm hanging up. I got the ick.
Yeah, stop it.
This was originally a call used to hail ships and boats. Ahoy has been a nautical greeting since at least the 18th century, and was just a common way of basically making their presence known. The old sea shanty, yo ho, such a crock of shit. 15 men on the dead man's chest from Treasure Island. It's boisterous and silly, but is again a crock of shit. Landlubber. We are landlubbers, the derogatory term used by sailors to describe someone unfamiliar with the sea. Landlubbers combines land and lubber, an old term for clumsy or inexperienced person. That is a real phrase. Arr! The quintessential pirate exclamation. This was a Long John Silver thing, as we mentioned earlier, so is largely fictitious and a bit of fun in literature. I'm going to quickly, before we wrap up, just do the pirate superstitions. Women on board. It was considered that we were bad luck. So having women on board, as they believed, it would distract the crew. Yeah. And anger the sea gods, leading to storms and misfortune. Cutting nails or hair at sea. So probably why pirates all had long hair. Shaving or cutting nails while at sea was thought to sever a sailor's connection to the land, inviting bad luck. Starting a voyage on a Friday. We did talk about this in our sea episode, actually. Many sailors believed it's unlucky to begin a journey on a Friday, associating the day with misfortune. And changing a ship's name, as we've said before, you have to always do a proper ceremony when renaming a ship, because otherwise you anger Poseidon or Neptune, depending on your preference, and he can cause a storm. Salt over the left shoulder was common practice to ward off bad luck and keep the devil at bay. A ship's cat, having a cat on board was thought to bring good luck, because especially as they approached a sailor, if the cat turned away, it was seen as a bad omen. Just as a bird, I know it's magpies now, but seeing birds approaching from the left was bad luck. Right was good luck. The albatross killing, so hence the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, killing an albatross was considered extremely unlucky, and these birds are believed to carry the souls of dead sailors, and it always makes me think as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. And hot cross buns. Carrying hot cross buns on a voyage was thought to protect against shipwrecks and ensure good luck, which is a good thing because I bloody love them.
I love that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? And then you've got, lastly, just before we wrap up, red sky at night in the morning. The saying red sky at night, sailor's delight, red sky at morning, shepherd's warning. Sailor's warning, sorry, reflects the belief that, same thing on the land, reflects the belief that a red sky indicates weather changes and a red morning sky suggesting bad weather ahead. What I love in The Vicar of Dibley is when they said red sky at morning, he said, suggests there's a thatched cottage on fire in the village. Eustace. Red sky in morning, Eustace is back. Red sky.
Eustace is back.
Never. Fucking Eustace is at large again, brick. Jonah in the Bible, a sailor or passenger considered bad luck based on the biblical story of Jonah. Redheads and clergymen. The bishop's back.
Alan better stay away from my ship. That's all I can say.
I'd say that bishop can come near my ship any day. The black dog sightings in some maritime folklore. Encountering a black dog, especially one that vanishes, is seen as a bad omen, signaling death or disaster. To be honest, if I saw a black dog and it vanished, I'd be like, fuck. I wouldn't be like, am I going to die? I'd be like, where the fuck did that dog go?
Dog overboard. How did Amy die? Because she was trying to find the dog.
Dog overboard. Amy followed it. Then Alix sort of just watched.
Amy can't swim very well.
Alix will never put herself at danger for anybody. So I was like, I go, oh, it's a sorry loss, but I am not willing to sacrifice myself.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. She was sound, and so was the dog. Anything to help your friend? No.
Put that on my tombstone. She was sound.
She was sound. Yeah, I feel like in the situation we're going to get in, maybe you will go before me, because clearly I'm never going to save anyone. Like, did you help your friend, Alix? No. I wouldn't be risking myself now.
No. Why would I do that?
No. I'm all right, and I think that's the main thing. So these superstitions and fears, I love it. You know, just as it is with the land, they're deeply implanted, and they became part of everyday life in a way. And I suppose they kind of probably killed some hours, because being at sea must have been pretty fucking dull for quite a lot of the time as well.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
I think it's fascinating. I love that we've romanticised it. I love that we've discussed bishops. I love that we've covered it all. If you had a passing note for those that have probably listened to this in two parts, I imagine, because we've done a longer ep, but what have you got for our parting note on the old pirates this evening?
I think it would just be to echo kind of what we've said, is that yes, we romanticize these things, and that inherently is something that we're always going to do. There's always going to be a period of history that is slightly more romanticized for us than other periods of history, but also look deeper and look at how terrible some of these things are. And I probably not conveyed that as well as I could have done with some of the stories, because I've emphasized that they're all probably mad lads and things like that, but there are some really awful things that have been enacted during the Golden Age of Piracy that had happened even before that, and that it's okay to romanticize, but also to look deeper at some of these stories and look at the full spectrum of this period of history and this phenomena.
Yeah, I think I don't think you've done anything other than making it fascinating, romantic, and exciting. So I don't think you need to do yourself an injustice saying, like, I probably could have done that. I don't think, I think you've done a sterling job, and I think you've done what people want from pirates, which is the exciting stories, the funny stories, and kind
of the fact they stink.
The fact they stink, like doing both sides, because as much as we have brought some reality to it as well, people love a pirate, and they always will.
Oh God, yeah, and they always will. There'll always be something about this that makes people go, oh, shiver me timbers.
Yeah, exactly. And who are we to ruin Christmas or ruin piracy for people? At the start, when you did the
ruining Christmas will be the next episode.
And next week, join in for ruining Christmas. And after, join us for We Punch Baby Jesus in the Face. But I think
you've been in one of my RE lessons.
Yeah. I still love as well, my favorite bit of this was probably the bit like, you wouldn't steal a car, you wouldn't break a window, whatever it was. It's like, do you know that? I used to literally cinema, and I used to go, I would. Like,
how would you know? I would.
I've never been wrong, but I'm like, I would. It's like, no, you wouldn't. You're the biggest geek ever. But I used to love this. And they always tried to make it really edgy. Like Carol Vorderman, when she did a times table video, and there's just kids in like round glasses with joggers, like, yeah, you want to look at me? We're doing times tables. It's like,
yeah. Did you see, just to go on to that anti-piracy video at the beginning of every DVD, that apparently the font that they used was pirated?
Oh, I bet it was, yeah.
So they were telling us not to steal a DVD in a handbag, but they were stealing a bloody font.
Oh, do you know what? Of everything that goes wrong in the world, is there anything lower than stealing a font? Because I won't have it.
No, you leave my windings alone.
That advert, if we're going to take anything from piracy, that advert is the sexiest bit of piracy, I think, to be honest. Great.
Yeah.
I just loved it. I used to be, that's serious nostalgia. That's like teletext, holidays on teletext, and reading your star signs in the paper. It's up there as like the trinity of things that you did in the 90s and the early 2000s. Pirates were smelly, seamany, quite literally, and in folklore, but they will continue to fascinate us forever because they are one of those things that just captures our fascination, our lusty thoughts, and our interest in history. I think long may it remain. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you've done it in a oneer, well done. If you've done it, we love you. And if you've done it in 5, you're still with us. We love you. You guys are getting us sailing well beyond 10,000 downloads, which is mental.
That's so mad. That's
mad, isn't it? When I look at people, looking at the stats and seeing who listens, when I look at the stats and the
nerd.
Yeah, nerd. I got the ick. I am amazed that people listen to us all over the world, and you really do. So thank you so much. I always thought Shropshire would be our base in terms of our main listeners, but obviously it's a county of 2 people living here, of which
me and you.
Basically, that's it.
We like to keep a distance. You're in the south. I'm in the east.
I never
keep a distance.
Yeah, we represent our sections.
Don't come over my hill. That's all I have to say.
She said to the bishop. But you guys, I mean, Shropshire's quite is not one of the hard, we've got Dublin, Melbourne, everything. You guys are really, really kind of looking after us. We love you. Thank you. And
thank you. Yeah.
PV soon. Thank you so much.